In this chapter, we're going to see how to use some important workflow tools and live applications. Specifically, we'll look at how to open and configure the control room to set up separate monitors and separate headphone mixes, how to set up and use the talkback and listen features of the control room, how to configure buses, tracks, mixes, and plugins to accommodate 5.1 surround sound, and how to use Cubase 6 in a live setting. Cubase can be configured for use in a traditional multi-room studio. In this type of facility, you typically have performers isolated in their own performance spaces, and the engineer or producer in another location called a control room. Cubase 6 allows you to set up your facility this way using the control room. The control room allows for a main mix to the engineer and 4 separate headphone mixes for the performers. These performers could be in separate locations or in one room, but with a different mix in each set of headphones. The control room also allows other important operations like switching monitors, talkback capacity, switching between mono, stereo, and surround modes, and selective dimming, known as listening, to help with troubleshooting during mixing. How many of these features you can use in your studio will depend on the processing power of your CPU and the routing options on your audio interface. Let's begin by enabling the control room in the VST Connections menu and the Studio tab. Next, we need to configure our connections, which are also called buses. There are 5 types of connections to choose from. The external input buses are for playback devices, like a CD player. Talkback is for a microphone at the mixing board, which the engineer uses to speak to the various performers throughout the studio. Talkback will be vital if your performers will be in separate rooms. Studios are the individual headphone mixes for your performers. Phones allow you to set up a dedicated headphone mix for the engineer, just in case your audio interface doesn't have a dedicated headphone jack on it. And monitors allow you to connect separate speakers to your interface and switch between them from within Cubase. Here's what a typical control room configuration looks like. The operations manual explains the details of setting up each type of bus step by step. One note, it's important to turn off the normal outputs in the Outputs tab so they don't conflict with the control room output routing. Now it's time to open the control room mixer. The control room mixer allows us to turn the talkback mic on and off, select which studios will hear the talkback signal, change monitors, change stereo configuration, select which mix is played in the control room, select which mix is played in each performer's studio, select who can hear the click track, and activate the listen function and determine how much to turn down the rest of the mix when a track is in listen mode. To activate the performer studios, select all tracks, then right-click on the control room mixer. Select Enable. You adjust the individual performer's mix or headphone mix in the main project mixer. Click on the star icon to call up the studio and send view. Make sure all the tracks have their studio sends turned on. Right-click on the control room mixer to set all studios to the current mix and pan levels. Now you can click and drag to make small adjustments for each track in each studio. Let's take a quick moment to look at how Cubase 6 handles surround sound. You record and play back surround, or 5.1, material in basically the same way as a normal stereo track. The only real difference is that you need more inputs and outputs on your interface, and you need to configure your buses for 5.1. Let's create a new bus in VST Connections. This time for configuration, select 5.1. Now let's add a new audio track and we'll configure it for 5.1 as well. Now when you record, you'll get recordings packaged as one 5.1 surround track. Of course, your interface must be configured to play back 5.1 signals, and you'll need an appropriate 5.1 surround amplifier and speaker setup to really take advantage of this capability. Here's an example of how a 5.1 surround plugin works. This is the surround panner, as well as a 5.1 mix and export. Finally, let's take a quick look at ways to use Cubase in a live environment. The first question you need to ask yourself is, where will I be during the show? On stage or at the front of house? If your desire is to use Cubase to capture a live performance, the fundamental recording process is no different from previously discussed. However, there are a few additional considerations. Do you have an audio interface that can receive enough channels to simultaneously multitrack? Or do you need to set up for a stereo-only mix? Will you place your own mics on the performer? Or will you take an aux send from the main mixing board? How clean is that signal? Does your laptop have enough CPU power to record a large number of tracks at once? Consider placing a protection limiter across the input bus on each channel to prevent transients or feedback from overloading your system. Put in the time ahead of time to configure templates and presets for the show, so you don't have to hold up the show or miss material while you're frantically adding tracks or routing signals. Preparation is everything. The band rehearses their part, you need to rehearse your part. If you're going to use Cubase on stage, you have several options. If you're a keyboard player, Cubase can serve as a powerful VST instrument rack. You can create a separate VST instrument rack inside Cubase for every song. You can, of course, use Cubase as a drum machine or a sequencer to supply rhythm or backing parts, just like traditional hardware sequencers. If you're a guitarist, you can use Cubase as a powerful effects rack using the VST amp rack and a low buffer setting. You can also save different VST amp rack configurations as different songs or different track presets to make switching between them a snap. If you're a DJ, then it's time to take a fresh look at Loop Mash 2. Loop Mash was introduced in version 5, and it provided many interesting possibilities. But the new performance controls in version 6 take it to a whole new level. Loop Mash 2 gives you 24 scenes, individual slice playback, edit, and effects, more global effects, the ability to drag and drop slices to form composite loops, the ability to drag and drop slices to Groove Agent 1, but best of all, 20 new performance controllers pre-configured to trigger from your master keyboard. Here's a sample. Finally, let's move into our last chapter where we'll demonstrate how to set up and use remote controls, quick controls, and user panels.